The knock came just after breakfast, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet of my kitchen like a warning bell. I shuffled to the door, coffee mug still warm in my hand, expecting the mailman or maybe a neighbor needing help with a package. But when I opened it, two strangers stood there, a man and a woman, smiling as though they'd just stepped into their dream. In the man's hand gleamed a set of shiny brass keys. He dangled them like an offering, cheerful, unaware of the storm those little pieces of metal carried. "Good morning," he said brightly. "We're the new owners. Just wanted to introduce ourselves and hand you the keys." My coffee mug tilted in my grip. For a second, I thought my hearing had finally gone the way of my knees. Sluggish, unreliable, with age, new owners, keys. My mouth went dry. Behind them, a moving truck idled at the curb, its open door gaping like the mouth of something ready to swallow me whole. The woman added kindly, "We thought it best to meet in person. Transitions like this aren't easy." I must have looked like a ghost standing in my own doorway. Transitions? Easy? This was my home. My wife and I laid every brick of our lives into these walls. 42 years of dinners, birthdays, arguments, laughter, and quiet mornings just like this one. I built the swing set out back with my bare hands. I planted the oak by the fence when my son was born. And now two strangers stood smiling with keys, talking about transitions. That was the first moment I realized my son had done the unthinkable. Before I continue, let me introduce myself the way my son seems to have forgotten. My name is Arthur Greene, 69 years old, retired machinist. I don't wear the years lightly. My shoulders remind me every morning of the weight they carried in the factory, and the ache in my knees announces the weather before the forecast does. But I've always stood proud, always carried my own. This house is more than wood and plaster. It's the only constant in a life built on sacrifice. My wife, Margaret, passed 6 years ago, but every room still holds her touch. The yellow curtains she loved in the kitchen, the embroidered pillows she stitched for the couch, the herb garden that refuses to die, no matter how clumsy my watering schedule. When the loneliness bites, these walls hold me like she still does. My son, Daniel, knows this, or at least I thought he did. He grew up in this very house, running through the halls with toy planes, leaving muddy cleats by the door after soccer games, shouting, "I'm home," whenever he slammed the front door in from school. This place isn't just mine, it's his history too. So why did he sell it out from under me? The strangers stood awkwardly as silence stretched between us. I could see the realization dawning on their faces, that I had no idea what they were talking about, that my son had done something behind my back. "I'm sorry," the man said finally, lowering the keys. We assumed you'd been told. We purchased the property 2 weeks ago. Your son handled the paperwork. 2 weeks ago." My chest tightened. That was right around the time Daniel had come by for Sunday dinner. He'd been unusually insistent that I eat more, take my vitamins, not push myself too hard. He'd even said the words that chilled me now. "Dad, you're too old to live alone. It's not safe anymore." At the time, I thought he was worried. A little overbearing, maybe, but worried all the same. Now I understood it was something else entirely. I stepped back from the door, suddenly needing the wall for support. The moving truck rumbled, a reminder that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was already in motion. A betrayal set in ink and signatures I never gave. When you're young, betrayal feels sharp, like a cut. When you're old, it feels heavy, like a weight pressing into your chest, grinding against the years you've lived, the sacrifices you've made. My own son had decided I was too old to keep my dignity, too old to make choices about my own life. too old to deserve the house I built with his mother. The woman's voice broke through my haze. Mr. Greene, if this isn't a good time, we understand. We just didn't want to move in without at least introducing ourselves. Move in. The phrase clanged inside my skull. They thought I was already gone, packed up, shipped out to whatever solution Daniel had lined up. Some senior home, some sterile room without history or warmth. My voice cracked when I finally spoke. This house isn't for sale. The man's face softened with pity, the kind of pity that burns worse than cruelty. I'm afraid it already is, sir. We signed the contracts, we paid. But, he hesitated, then pressed the keys into my palm. We can't take this. Not like this. Something's not right. The metal was cold against my skin. I stared at it, at them, at the truck waiting in my driveway. And all I could think was that my son, my only child, had turned me into a problem to be solved. I closed the door slowly, the keys still clutched in my hand, and the house that had always felt safe suddenly seemed like a stranger around me. The house was silent after I closed the door, but not peaceful. Silence that once felt like comfort, now pressed down like a storm cloud. I sat at the kitchen table, the keys the strangers had given me still cold in my hand. I didn't have to wait long for answers. My phone buzzed on the table, Daniel's name lighting the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out, but something in me snapped. I swiped to answer, my voice sharp. Daniel, what have you done? A pause, then his voice too casual. So they dropped by, huh? I told them to wait until I was there. Guess they were just excited. Excited? My chest tightened. They said they're the new owners of this house. My house. The house your mother and I built. His sigh crackled through the speaker. Dad, I told you. This place is too much for you. The stairs, the yard work, living alone. You're almost 70. It's not safe. Not safe. He'd repeated it like some rehearsed line, like he'd convinced himself that stealing from his own father was noble as long as he wrapped it in worry. You sold my house. My voice was low, steady, the way steel sounds when it bends but doesn't break. I didn't sell it, Dad. We sold it. You'll thank me when you're settled somewhere better. You'll have assisted living, meals prepared, people around if you fall. No more shoveling snow or mowing the lawn. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of? I pushed back my chair and stood, pacing the kitchen. The oak floors creaked beneath my steps. I don't need to be taken care of. I need respect, Daniel. And you don't sell a man's house out from under him to prove you care. On the other end, his tone hardened. You're being dramatic. The paperwork's already done. The money's in the account. This is for your own good, whether you see it or not. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles whitened. The money's in whose account, Daniel? Silence. That told me more than words ever could. When Margaret and I built this home, it wasn't just a house. It was our fortress. I'd worked overtime shifts at the plant, 12 hours in steel-toed boots, so we could afford the down payment. She painted these walls herself, one room at a time, humming hymns under her breath while the children ran wild in the yard. And now, my own son had turned those memories into currency. Daniel, I said slowly, deliberately, you had no right. His defensiveness flared hot. I'm your son. I have every right to make sure you're safe. You don't get it. You're vulnerable. You could slip in the bathtub tomorrow and nobody would know until it's too late. Do you want me to get that call, Dad? From the coroner? Manipulation dressed as concern. He thought if he painted me as fragile enough, I'd forget the theft and thank him for it. But beneath his words, I heard it, the edge of desperation. And I knew then this wasn't about safety. It was about something else. Money, convenience, control. Later that afternoon, he showed up in person. His SUV pulled into the driveway with the confidence of someone who thought he'd already won. The same driveway where he'd learned to ride his first bike, now a runway for his arrogance. He walked in without knocking, as though the place were already his. My house, my walls. "Dad," he began, spreading his hands like a peacemaker, "I know you're upset, but this really is the best thing for everyone. You'll see." I stood in the living room, framed by the photographs Margaret had hung decades ago. The best thing for everyone, or the best thing for you? His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw the flicker of guilt, but it vanished quick, replaced by indignation. "You don't understand how hard it's been. Sarah and I—" There it was. The daughter-in-law. Sarah. Always the quiet shadow behind him, always whispering about what I should and shouldn't do with my retirement, my money, my life. "Don't you dare blame this on anyone else," I cut him off. "You looked me in the eye, in this very kitchen, and told me I was too old to live alone. Then you sold the roof over my head without my knowledge." He crossed his arms, defensive. "I did what needed to be done. You're one fall away from a nursing home anyway. This way, at least you'll have some dignity left." Dignity. The word hit like a slap. All those years I'd broken my back to give him a stable life. Every overtime shift, every holiday missed so he could have the childhood he deserved. And now he stood there, calling it dignity to be stripped of my independence, my home, my say in my own future. I realized then that my son didn't see me as his father anymore. He saw me as an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. I walked past him toward the front door. My hands didn't shake when I pointed to the threshold. "Get out!" His eyes widened. "What?" "You heard me. Get out of this house. You may have signed papers, but this is still my home, and until the law says otherwise, you'll respect it." His face flushed red, equal parts fury and disbelief. "You'll regret this, Dad. You're making a mistake." Maybe I was, but it was mine to make. I closed the door behind him with a finality that rattled the glass panes. The silence returned, heavier than ever. But beneath the weight something else stirred, resolve. The hours after Daniel left stretched long and hollow. I sat in the living room as the afternoon light shifted across the rug, shadows crawling toward evening. My house, the house I'd paid for brick by brick, the house that held Margaret's laughter in its walls, felt invaded even though I was alone. On the coffee table lay the keys the strangers had pressed into my hand. They glimmered in the dim light, mocking me. My own house, my own keys, handed back like a pity prize. I poured myself another cup of coffee, though it had long since grown cold, and stared at the family photographs lining the mantel. Daniel at 5 years old, gap-toothed and grinning with ice cream smeared across his cheeks. Daniel at 16, standing proudly with his first car, the one I'd worked double shifts to buy. Daniel at his wedding, beaming as Sarah slid a ring on his finger. Margaret beside me with tears in her eyes. When had that boy, the boy I'd sacrificed so much for, become this man who sold his father's house without blinking? The question gnawed at me until I finally reached for the drawer in my desk. Inside were bills, bank statements, and documents I kept neatly stacked, as Margaret had always insisted. I flipped through them, hands steady, looking for anything unusual. It didn't take long. A withdrawal notice. $15,000 pulled from my account without my signature. I knew immediately how it had happened. Daniel had access to my online banking. Years ago, when Margaret was in the hospital, he'd helped me pay her bills online. I'd never revoked his access. Back then, I'd told myself it was trust. Now, I saw it for what it was. A door left wide open. And that wasn't the only thing. Credit card charges stared back at me. High-end electronics, luxury handbags, dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. None of it mine. All of it recent. Sarah's influence hung over every line item. Designer shoes, boutique spas, a necklace that cost more than my first car. I pressed my hands to the desk, the betrayal sinking deeper into my bones. Daniel hadn't sold my house for my safety. He'd sold it because he and Sarah were drowning in expenses they couldn't afford. And rather than face the consequences, they'd decided to erase me. That night, I barely slept. Memories tangled with anger until dawn bled pale across the horizon. When the phone finally rang, I didn't even glance at the caller ID. I already knew. "Dad," Daniel's voice crackled through as smooth as oil. "I didn't want to leave things the way they ended yesterday. Can I come by?" I could have said no. Every instinct screamed to slam the line dead. But something in me wanted the truth laid bare, face to face. "Come," I said. My voice was flat, almost unrecognizable to my own ears. When he arrived, Sarah was with him. She swept into my living room like she owned it, her perfume heavy, her smile thin. Her eyes scanned the furniture, the paintings, the shelves, as though she were already dividing it all into categories: hers, his, useless. Daniel started his speech before he even sat down. "Dad, I know you're upset, but you have to see the bigger picture. This house is equity. It's money tied up in walls and wood, doing nothing. Selling it frees you from the burden and helps us all. Helps us all." Sarah leaned forward, her manicured fingers folded neatly on her lap. "Arthur, it's not just about you anymore. Daniel and I have responsibilities. The kids' school fees, our mortgage, debts. Life is expensive. You're sitting on a gold mine while we're struggling." I stared at her, the gall of her words burning hotter than Daniel's. "Struggling." My voice was quiet, but it carried an edge sharp enough to slice through the air. "You call spa trips and diamond necklaces struggling?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before she plastered the smile back on. Daniel shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The sale's already finalized. You'll have a room in a nice facility, meals cooked, nurses on call. You'll be comfortable. Comfortable, like an old dog sent to a kennel." I stood, my joints protesting, but my back straightening with every inch. "You listen to me, both of you. I've shoveled snow from this driveway in storms that would send you running inside. I've worked my hands raw to keep food on this table. And you," I pointed at Sarah, "you walk in here talking about responsibilities as if spending other people's money is a burden." Daniel's face reddened. "Enough. You don't know how hard life is now. You had it easy, pension, a paid-off house. Times are different. We're just trying to survive." I barked a bitter laugh. "Survive? On my dime? You didn't sell this house because you cared about me. You sold it because you've been living beyond your means, and you thought I was too old to fight back." For a heartbeat, silence. Then Sarah stood, her smile gone. "We'll be back with paperwork, Arthur. You can rant all you want, but the world doesn't stop for your stubborn pride." They left, the front door slamming behind them like a verdict. I stood there in the quiet, my chest heaving, the air heavy with the scent of Sarah's perfume lingering like poison. "Too old to live alone," Daniel had said. But as I looked around my house, every picture frame, every memory staring back, I realized something. I might be old, but I wasn't powerless, and they had underestimated me. The next morning, I woke to the low growl of a truck engine outside my window. For a moment, I thought it was a bad dream, that yesterday's confrontation had been nothing but restless imagination. But when I pulled back the curtain, I saw it, Another moving van parked bold as brass in my driveway. Two young men in uniforms were unloading cardboard boxes, chatting idly as if they weren't dismantling my life piece by piece. I stepped onto the porch, the morning air sharp against my skin. "What do you think you're doing?" My voice cracked, but not from weakness, from fury. One of them looked up, startled, then checked his clipboard. Mr. Greene? We're here on order from your son. Said to start packing the interior today." Packing. Interior. Words that felt like nails driven into the walls of my chest. I walked back inside before my knees gave way. When I reached the living room, I froze. My belongings, the little things Margaret and I had collected over a lifetime, were already being stacked into boxes. The embroidered pillows Margaret had stitched with her delicate hands, tossed into a box labeled linens. The oak photo frames I'd polished every spring, wrapped hastily in paper, their glass surfaces smudged. And worst of all, our wedding photo, the one where Margaret wore that soft cream dress because we couldn't afford white lace, lay face down on the floor as if discarded. The movers weren't cruel, just efficient. But their efficiency carved into me deeper than any insult Daniel had thrown. They weren't just packing boxes. They were packing me. I staggered into the kitchen, clutching the counter for balance. The scent of Margaret's herb garden drifted through the window. Rosemary and thyme, still thriving against all odds. She used to clip sprigs to flavor our Sunday roasts. Now the little clay pots looked fragile, as if the next careless hand would shatter them. I touched the windowsill gently, whispering her name like a prayer. "Too old to live alone." Daniel's words echoed in my skull. Too old to cook in my own kitchen. Too old to drink coffee in the chair she picked out. Too old to stand here and remember the life we built. Everywhere I looked, the house reflected back a different memory. Daniel's soccer cleats by the fireplace, his first Christmas stocking still folded in the attic, Margaret humming as she sewed curtains in the dining room. These weren't just objects. They were proof of a life lived. And now my son wanted to sweep them away as though they were clutter. By mid-morning, the neighbors had noticed. Mrs. Henderson from across the street paused while walking her terrier, her brow furrowing at the sight of boxes stacked by the curb. Mr. Patel, who tended his roses like they were his children, leaned on his rake and whispered something to his wife. I could feel their pity from across the street. To them, it must have looked like a frail old man finally moving out, shipped off to a retirement home by his well-meaning son. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know this wasn't mercy. It was theft dressed as concern. The pity in their eyes burned worse than anger, because pity meant they thought I had lost. Around noon, Daniel arrived. Sarah was with him, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Dad, this is for the best," Daniel said before I could even open my mouth. "The movers will handle everything. Less stress for you." I stood in the living room, boxes around me like tombstones, my hands clenched at my sides. Stress? Watching strangers box up my life is supposed to ease my stress? Sarah's voice cut in, smooth and sharp. "Arthur, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The facility we found is one of the best. They have activities, meals, doctors on staff. You'll thank us. Thank them." I picked up the fallen wedding photo, brushing dust from the glass. Margaret's smile stared back at me, alive in that frozen moment. I held it up. "Did you thank her when she sewed your Halloween costume, Daniel? Did you thank me when I worked nights so you could have that first car? This house is gratitude carved into wood and stone. And you dare to stand here and tell me I should thank you for erasing it?" Daniel's jaw tightened, but Sarah's eyes flickered with something colder, triumph. She wanted this. She wanted me gone. As the movers carried another box past, I reached out and stopped them with a raised hand. "Leave it," I said firmly. The young man glanced nervously at Daniel, who nodded toward him. "Ignore him. Keep working." That was when something inside me snapped. I walked to the door, flung it open, and let my voice carry across the driveway. "Stop! All of you. This is my house, and until a court tells me otherwise, nobody moves another damn thing." The movers froze, caught between orders and conscience. Daniel's voice rose, angry now. "Dad, don't make a scene. You're embarrassing yourself." Embarrassing myself? I turned, the wedding photo still clutched in my hand. "No, Daniel. I'm finally waking up. You think I'm too old to fight back? Watch me." The words hung in the air, sharper than the creak of the moving truck door slamming shut. For the first time since this nightmare began, Daniel faltered. That night, long after the movers left, I sat in the half-empty living room surrounded by boxes I'd refused to let them take. My body ached, my hands trembled, but my mind was steady. I wasn't powerless. Not yet. And if my son thought he could erase me with a signature, he had underestimated the man who built this house from nothing. That evening, the house felt colder than it ever had in winter. I sat in the living room, surrounded by half-filled boxes, the wedding photo resting carefully on the mantel where it belonged. The silence pressed down on me, not the comfortable silence of a home at rest, but the suffocating kind that made the walls feel closer, the air heavier. The tick of the old grandfather clock echoed through the room, each swing of its pendulum reminding me how quickly time passes, and how little of it my son seemed to think I had left. I'd always thought the hardest part of growing old would be the body. Knees that refused to bend, eyes that needed glasses, hands that ached in the cold. But no, the hardest part was the betrayal. To watch the boy I'd raised, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, look me in the eye and tell me I was too old to deserve my own life. That was the weight pressing hardest on my chest. For 2 days, I lived in limbo. The movers didn't return, but the boxes sat there like accusations, reminding me of the war brewing in my own family. I kept expecting Daniel to call, to offer an apology, to at least acknowledge what he had done. Instead, the phone stayed silent. When neighbors passed, they looked at me differently now. Mrs. Henderson gave me an extra long smile, the kind you give to someone you know is losing something important. Mr. Patel, kind man that he is, offered to help me settle in once I moved, though I hadn't told him I was moving. Gossip travels fast on suburban streets. Each look of pity stung worse than Daniel's words. It meant they believed his version of the money story, that I was fragile, incapable, ready to be tucked away. At night, sleep came in fragments. I would wake with Margaret's name on my lips, reaching instinctively for a presence that had been gone 6 years. In the quiet hours, I replayed Daniel's justifications in my mind. "You're too old to live alone. You'll be safer. It's for your own good." The words twisted like thorns. Had Margaret been alive, she would have fought him tooth and nail. She never let anyone make decisions for her, not me, not doctors, not her family. She'd have stood in this living room, chin lifted, eyes blazing, and told Daniel exactly what she thought of his concern. But now it was only me and the silence. On the third morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm in my hands. The curtains Margaret had chosen swayed gently in the breeze from the open window, carrying the scent of her herbs. Rosemary, thyme, mint. She always said a house with herbs in the window would never feel empty. Yet here I was, staring at boxes that threatened to erase everything we'd built. I was still staring when a car pulled into the driveway. My heart clenched, expecting Daniel, Sarah, maybe more threats. But when I peered through the window, it wasn't them. It was the new owners, the same couple who had stood on my porch with keys 3 days earlier. This time their faces were grim, their movements careful. They got out of the car, carrying a folder between them, and approached the door slowly, as though unsure of their welcome. The man knocked gently. I opened the door, wary, the sting of betrayal still raw in my chest. "Mr. Greene," he said quietly, "we need to talk." We sat at the dining table, the very one where Margaret had served Sunday roasts, where Daniel once did his homework with pencil shavings scattered across the wood. The couple looked at each other before the woman spoke. "We didn't realize, when we bought this house, that you weren't aware of the sale. We assumed you had agreed. But after we left, it didn't sit right with us." Her husband opened the folder, sliding papers toward me. Receipts, copies of emails, agreements, all bearing Daniel's name, not mine. "We paid a down payment," he continued, "but the title still hasn't transferred. It can't, not without your signature. Your son told us you had already moved out, that you were eager to downsize." I stared at the papers, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from fury. Daniel had lied, not just to me, but to them. He had forged the story to make himself look like the dutiful son, while I became nothing more than a box to be checked off. The woman reached into her purse, pulled out the same brass keys, and set them gently on the table. "These belong to you," she said firmly. "We won't take a home that isn't freely given. Not like this." For a long moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened with a mixture of relief and grief. Relief that the house was still mine, for now. Grief that it took strangers, not my own son, to remind me of my worth. Finally, I whispered, "Thank you." The man shook his head. "Don't thank us. Just protect what's yours. Families can be complicated, but this house, it's yours. It should stay that way until you decide otherwise." When they left, the key sat on the table, gleaming in the morning light. For the first time in days, I felt something return to me. Not joy, not peace, but resolve. Daniel thought I was too old to fight, too old to matter, too old to hold on. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The morning after the couple returned the keys, I sat at the same kitchen table, staring at them. Brass, simple, ordinary, and yet they carried the weight of everything I still had left. My house, my independence, my dignity. I ran my thumb along their edges, feeling the ridges bite into my skin. Daniel had thought he could strip this from me. Sarah probably encouraged him, whispering about money, debts, and responsibilities. But they'd underestimated me. Because I wasn't just angry now. I was curious. What had pushed them so far? Why had my son, my own flesh and blood, decided that stealing from me was easier than asking for help? I pulled out the manila folder I kept in my desk drawer. Inside were bank statements, bills, and credit card records, neatly filed as Margaret had always insisted. She believed in order, in keeping track of every dollar, and I'd carried that habit into my retirement. I flipped through the statements, scanning for the charges I'd noticed before. They jumped off the page like bruises. A $2,400 charge at a jewelry store downtown. $3,800 at a spa resort 2 counties over. And the worst of it, a $15,000 withdrawal from my savings account, made online using my credentials. I pressed my fingers into the page until the paper crinkled. The signatures weren't mine. The requests weren't mine. But the access, that was Daniel's. I had given it to him years ago, back when Margaret was sick and I'd needed help with the bills. What I thought was trust had become the key he used to rob me blind. That afternoon, I took a quiet walk to the lawyer's office downtown. Margaret and I had worked with Margaret Summers, a sharp woman who had helped us set up our will years ago. She'd guided us through estate planning, always urging us to think ahead. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile as I walked in, my cane tapping softly against the polished floor. "Mr. Greene, she's available. Go right in." When I stepped into her office, Margaret looked up from her desk, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. "Arthur," she said warmly, "it's been a long time. What brings you in today?" I sat heavily across from her, laying the folder on her desk. "Betrayal," I said simply. She raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. I spread the papers in front of her, withdrawals, credit card charges, property sale documents. I told her about Daniel, about the movers, about the new owners who had handed the keys back when they realized I'd been deceived. Her pen scratched across a notepad as she listened, her expression sharpening with each detail. When I finished, she leaned back, folding her hands together. "Arthur, this isn't just family conflict. This is fraud. It's financial exploitation of an elder. If you wanted to, you could press charges." The word fraud rang in my ears. Fraud. Not mistake. Not misunderstanding. Fraud. "Would that stop him?" I asked quietly. "It would certainly wake him up," she said. "But I suspect your son would only grow more hostile. We can take other steps, though. Legal protections, account security, changes to your will. Things that ensure this never happens again." I nodded slowly. "That's what I want. Protection, not revenge." But even as I said it, something inside me disagreed. This wasn't only about protection anymore. It was about making sure Daniel understood the cost of betrayal. That evening, I sat in my office, the glow of the computer screen illuminating the papers spread across my desk. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I logged into my bank account. Daniel's name appeared under authorized users for my credit card, a status I had given him when he was in college, meant for emergencies. 20 years later, he had turned emergencies into a lifestyle. My cursor hovered over the option, Remove Authorized User. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I doubted it, but because of what it symbolized. Cutting him off meant finally accepting that my son wasn't the boy with ice cream on his cheeks anymore. He was a man who saw his father not as family, but as a bank account. I clicked Confirm. The screen blinked, then displayed the message. Changes will take effect within 1 business day. Next, I changed the PINs, canceled automatic transfers, and shut down every open channel Daniel had used to leech from me. Each keystroke felt like a small act of rebellion, like taking bricks back from the wall he'd tried to steal. By the time I logged out, the bank account was mine again, untouchable. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but steadier than I'd felt in weeks. Out the window, the neighborhood was quiet. The Henderson kids played basketball in their driveway. Mr. Patel trimmed his roses. Ordinary lives, ordinary evenings. And mine had shifted forever. I wasn't naive enough to think Daniel would give up easily. When he discovered his lifeline had been cut, he would come storming back, full of threats and fury. But this time, I would be ready. The call came early the next morning. I had just settled into my chair with coffee when the phone lit up with Daniel's name. My finger hovered over the answer button. A part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part wanted to hear the panic I knew was waiting on the other end. "Dad," his voice barked the second I picked up. "What the hell did you do?" I sipped my coffee slowly. "Good morning, Daniel. Care to be more specific?" "My card isn't working. Sarah's payment for the SUV bounced. The rent check didn't clear. Don't play games with me. What did you do?" I let the silence stretch before answering. "I took back what's mine," he exploded. "You cut me off? After everything I've done for you? You're out of your mind." I almost laughed. After everything he'd done for me? The boy who had just tried to sell my house behind my back had the nerve to act like I owed him. "This was never about helping me," I said flatly. This was about you living off me. That ends now." "Don't do this, Dad," he warned, his voice slipping into that threatening growl I knew too well. "You think you can just pull the plug? You think you can cut me out like some stranger? I'm your son. You'll regret this." He hung up before I could answer. By afternoon, I heard the roar of an engine in the driveway. Tires squealed against the asphalt, the sound sharp and angry. I stepped to the window. Daniel's SUV sat crooked across the lawn. Sarah in the passenger seat with her sunglasses still perched high, like she was arriving at a red carpet event rather than my front porch. A moment later, the doorbell rang. Not once, 3 times, sharp and demanding. I opened the door to find them both glaring at me, their fury radiating like heat. "Dad," Daniel began, his tone clipped, "we need to talk. Now." "No," I said calmly. "You need to listen," Sarah scoffed. "Oh, please, spare us the lecture. You can't just cut us off like this. We have bills, obligations, children, your grandchildren. Or have you forgotten about them? The weapon." She wielded it smoothly, just as Daniel had. "The grandchildren, Emma and Jake." My chest ached at the mention of them, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. "Don't drag the children into this," I said evenly. "They're not pawns in your little game." Daniel's face flushed. "You don't get it, do you? Family takes care of family. You think you can shut me out, but it doesn't work like that. You're stuck with us, whether you like it or not." "No, Daniel." I stepped into the doorway, my voice firm. "You're stuck with your own choices. And for the first time in your life, you're going to face them without me bailing you out." For a moment, the silence between us was thicker than any shouting. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Daniel's fist clenched. And then he said the words that chilled me more than the threat of losing my house. "We know where you live, old man. We know your routines. You can't hide from us." The menace in his voice was clear. Not a plea, not even manipulation anymore. A threat. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just greed. It was war. I didn't back down. For years, I had swallowed my anger, written the checks, made the excuses. For years, I told myself that love meant sacrifice, even when that sacrifice bled me dry. But standing there, Daniel's shadow looming in my doorway, I felt something stronger than fear. Resolve. "You're threatening me in my own home," I said, my voice low and steady. "Think about that, Daniel. Think about how far you've fallen." Sarah stepped forward, her heels clicking against the porch. "Arthur, you're making a mistake. You'll end up alone. Nobody to help you when you're sick. Nobody to visit you in those long, lonely days. Is that what you want? To die bitter and forgotten?" Her words were poison, crafted to strike at the deepest fear of old age, loneliness. But instead of breaking me, they hardened me. I thought of Margaret, of the years we built together. I thought of Emma and Jake, who still had a chance to grow up free of their parents' greed. And I thought of this house, the only place left that still held my dignity. "You think I fear being alone?" I asked. "I've already been alone since the day Margaret left this world. And even in that loneliness, I never betrayed anyone the way you've betrayed me." Daniel's face twisted, but before he could reply, I leaned forward, my voice sharp as glass. "You sold my house without my consent. You drained my accounts. You lied, forged, manipulated, and now you stand here making threats. You've mistaken my love for weakness. That ends today." For once he faltered. His mouth opened, then closed. He wasn't used to me standing tall, wasn't used to hearing the word no. Sarah tugged his arm, her voice dripping disdain. "Come on, Daniel. He'll come crawling back when he realizes he can't live without us." But I saw it in her eyes. Fear. She knew I meant it this time. Daniel's glare lingered a moment longer before he turned on his heel, stomping back to the SUV. The engine revved, the tires screamed, and they were gone, their taillights vanishing down the street. Inside, I leaned against the door, my breath coming heavy. My heart pounded like it hadn't in years, but not from weakness, from adrenaline, from freedom. I walked into the living room, past the boxes that still stood like silent witnesses, and placed the brass keys on the mantel beside Margaret's photo. "This is still ours," I whispered to her, my hand brushing the frame. "And it always will be." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of calm. Not peace, not yet. But the storm was shifting, because I had finally drawn the line. And the next move would be mine. The morning after Daniel's threats, I drove back to Margaret Summers' office. My cane clicked against the polished floor as I walked in, but I didn't feel frail. I felt sharper than I had in years. She rose from her desk when I entered, her expression softening. "Arthur, you've decided?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm not letting them take another inch. Not my money, not my house, not my dignity." I laid the folder of evidence on her desk again. Bank statements, fraudulent withdrawals, the attempted property sale. "I want everything locked down," I said. "Every account, every asset. If my son so much as breathes near my finances again, I want the law standing between us." Margaret nodded. "We can do that. Power of attorney revoked, accounts restructured, legal guardianship protections filed, and the will, you'll want that revised too." I took a slow breath. This was the hardest part, but I knew it had to be said. "Yes, the will." She lifted her pen. "What do you want, Arthur?" "I want Daniel cut out completely. Not a penny, not an acre, not a chair from this house. If anyone is to benefit, it will be Emma and Jake. They're children. They still have a chance to grow up without learning their parents' greed. And if not them, then a charity, someone who'll use it for good, not selfishness." Margaret's eyes softened. "You understand the weight of this? It's final. No going back." I stared at the photo on her desk of her own family, smiling faces frozen in time. "Family isn't blood, Margaret. Family is loyalty. He made his choice. Now I'm making mine." She nodded and began writing. Each stroke of her pen felt like bricks being cemented into a wall between me and Daniel, a wall he could never climb. When I returned home, the house felt different, stronger somehow. Maybe it was just me. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the small relics of Margaret's life. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't just clinging to the house. I was defending it, and I wasn't defending it alone. The law was now on my side. The will was mine again. The money was sealed. Daniel had thought I was too old to fight, but I had just declared war, and he hadn't even realized it yet. It didn't take long for Daniel to discover the changes. 3 days later, my doorbell rang again. I opened it to find him alone this time, his face pale with fury. "You went to a lawyer," he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I've protected myself. From you." He stepped closer, his jaw tight. "You can't just cut your only son out of your life. That's not how this works. I've been there for you. I've taken care of you." The laugh that broke from my chest was raw, bitter. "Taking care of me? Daniel, you nearly sold me out of my own home. You drained my savings. You lied to strangers just to get your hands on what I built. If that's your definition of care, then God help anyone else you claim to love." His eyes flickered, but he pressed on. "I need that money, Dad. Sarah and I, we're in deep debts, loans. People are waiting to be paid. You think you're teaching me a lesson, but you're putting us in danger." There it was. The truth he had been circling all along. "This was never about me," I said. "This was about you gambling with your future and trying to cash me in as the insurance." He flinched, and I knew I had struck the vein. "I'll fight this," he spat. "I'll contest the will, drag you into court. You'll be humiliated." I stepped forward, my cane steady in my hand. "Do it. Contest it. Every document, every forged withdrawal, every fraudulent sale, it's all recorded now. You think a judge will side with the son who robbed his father blind? You'll bury yourself." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. "Dad." His voice softened, almost breaking. "You don't mean this. You can't cut me off. I'm your son." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I forced the words out anyway. "You stopped being my son the day you treated me like a burden instead of a father. Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. From this day forward, you have nothing from me. Not my money, not my home, not even my name." His face twisted with rage and desperation. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. After a moment, he turned and stormed down the porch steps, slamming the car door so hard the echo rattled the windows. I stood in the doorway long after he was gone, the quiet wrapping around me again. But this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was freedom. The days that followed were strangely quiet. No movers, no calls, no threats. At first, I thought maybe Daniel had finally come to his senses, that perhaps he'd lick his wounds and accept the wall I'd built between us. But the silence didn't last long. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with a newspaper when a familiar car slowed to a crawl in front of my house. It wasn't Daniel's SUV. It was a tow truck. And strapped to the back of it, glinting in the sunlight, was Sarah's luxury SUV. The driver idled for a moment, checking the clipboard, then continued down the street. But I saw enough. Repossession. My chest tightened, not with pity, but with grim confirmation. Without my accounts, without my money propping them up, Daniel and Sarah's empire of credit cards and lies was collapsing. That evening, I got a call from Margaret Summers. "Arthur," she said, her voice brisk, "you'll want to know this. Daniel reached out. Tried to challenge the will." My grip on the phone tightened. And he failed. The documents are airtight. He can't touch a dime, not without exposing his fraud. If he pushes further, he risks criminal charges. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Relief mingled with sorrow. I hadn't wanted it to come to this. Cutting my own son from my life like a tumor. But what choice had he left me? "Thank you, Margaret," I said quietly. "For everything." She hesitated. "Arthur, I've seen families destroy themselves over money, but I've also seen people walk away stronger. Don't let his choices define your peace. You've earned better." Her words lingered long after we hung up. The next day, the storm broke. Daniel came pounding on my door again. But he wasn't the same man who had stood there weeks ago, full of swagger and threats. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. His eyes, those same blue eyes Margaret once said were the mirror of mine, looked hollow, desperate. When I opened the door, he didn't shout. He didn't even demand. He just stood there, his chest heaving. "Dad," he rasped, "please, we're drowning. The house is in foreclosure. Sarah's threatening to leave. The kids, they ask why we can't go out anymore, why we don't have what their friends have." For a moment, the father in me stirred, aching at the pain in his voice. I remembered the boy who used to curl up in my lap after nightmares, whispering that he didn't want the monsters to get him. But then I remembered the boxes in my living room, the forged signatures, the threats in his voice when he told me I was too old. The monster he had become wasn't under the bed. It was standing on my porch. "I warned you," I said softly. I gave you every chance, and you chose greed over family. This is the cost, Daniel, and only you can pay it." His lips trembled. For a second, I thought he might apologize, that maybe some shard of remorse would finally break through. Instead, he whispered, "You'll regret this," and turned away. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders slumped, the weight of his own choices finally pressing down. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel pity. I felt free. That night, I sat in the quiet of my home, Margaret's photo glowing softly in the lamplight. I touched the frame and whispered, "It's over, love." He tried to take everything from us, but we're still here. We still won. The brass keys gleamed on the mantel beside her photo, no longer mocking me, but shining like a promise. My son had thought I was too old to fight, too old to matter, but I had proven him wrong. And though the battle had cost me dearly, it had given me back something I hadn't felt in years: dignity. The weeks that followed were quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. Not suffocating, not heavy. Just still. The boxes were gone, unpacked one by one as I returned each memory to its rightful place. Margaret's embroidered pillows back on the couch, the photo frames polished and standing proudly on the mantel. The wedding picture hung straight on the wall, her smile steady as ever. For the first time since this nightmare began, the house felt whole again. I spent my mornings as I always had, coffee in the kitchen, the curtains Margaret had chosen swaying in the breeze. The herbs still grew stubbornly on the windowsill, their scent filling the air. Rosemary, thyme, mint. A reminder that life, even when tended by tired hands, could endure. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for the phone to ring, for Daniel to call, for Sarah's sharp voice to cut through my peace. But the calls never came, and slowly I realized I didn't miss them. What I missed was the boy Daniel once was, the child who ran through these halls, leaving muddy cleats by the door, the boy who hugged me on Christmas mornings, eyes wide with wonder at gifts far simpler than the luxuries he chased now. That boy was gone, lost to greed and pride, and mourning him would be a lifetime's work. But the man he became, I would not mourn him. One evening, as the sun sank low, I walked through the backyard. The oak tree stood tall by the fence, its branches stretching high. I planted it the day Daniel was born, a fragile sapling that somehow weathered decades of storms. I rested my hand on its bark, rough and steady beneath my palm. That tree was proof of something Daniel had forgotten. Roots matter. You don't cut them away for quick money. You don't abandon them when they get old. You nurture them. You protect them. And if you don't, they'll outlast you anyway. I made peace with the truth. I had lost my son, but I had gained something else. Strength, boundaries, a sense of myself I hadn't felt in years. The house wasn't just walls and wood. It was a legacy. And now it was safe, not because Daniel respected it, but because I had fought for it. When my time does come, it won't go to him. It will go to Emma and Jake, or to hands that will honor it. My son may have tried to erase me, but I made sure the story of this home and the love it carried will outlive him. That night, I sat in the living room with the brass keys glinting on the mantel beside Margaret's photo. I lifted them, feeling their weight one last time, and whispered, "We won, love." The fight had been bitter, the loss of my son a wound I'd carry forever. But I hadn't let him take me with him. He told me I was too old to live alone. But the truth, I was just old enough to know that living alone with dignity is better than living surrounded by betrayal. And that is something no one can take from me. Outro, CTA for YouTube. If you've ever felt underestimated, betrayed, or written off just because of age, Let this story remind you, dignity has no expiration date. Before you go, let me ask, have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family, even when it broke your heart? Share your story in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe.